Good afternoon. Welcome to the FTD University webinar titled Developing a Multi-Generational Marketing Approach. Today you will learn the key similarities and differences by generation and some specific steps that can be taken to reach and resonate with each generation. Marc Goulet, Vice President of Client Development for Russell Research, will be leading this informative webinar. He has spent nearly 2 decades in the field of marketing research, specializing in the design and execution of strategic research studies. Marc has been working with the Society of American Florists since 2009, when the first generation research was conducted, and he was featured in SAF's Floral Management magazine this past year. Marc draws on his retail shopping insights experience to present floral marketing insights for organizations. Once Marc is finished with his presentation, we will open the webinar up for questions. If you have a question, simply type it in that question box on the upper right side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions during the presentation, and we'll hold them until the Q&A portion of the webinar. So without further ado, I would like to turn the call over to Marc to begin the webinar. Marc?
Thanks, Janet. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marc Goulet. I'm with Russell Research in New Jersey, and today I will be taking you through the Generations of Flowers research. This is a study we've been doing since 2009 with the Society of American Florists, and I'm going to take you through 2 halves of this presentation today. The first half will go through the research findings. It's a study we've conducted twice, so we have some really interesting trend information by different generations, and that's Gen Y, or known as Millennials, Gen X, as well as Baby Boomers. To start the presentation, I just want to give you a little bit of background. Again, as I mentioned, the Society of American Florists had commissioned this research back in 2009, and it was replicated just a year ago in January 2016. This was funded by the Society of American Florists along with the American Floral Endowment, as well as the Floral Marketing Research Fund. If you do have access to this deck, there are links to each of their websites in there where you can find out more information. To give you some background about what's covered in this research and what we're going to be going through today, first is appreciation and knowledge of flowers. Do consumers value and appreciate flowers? How much do they actually know about flowers when they're making purchases and for different occasions? We looked at their purchase behavior, both when they're buying flowers for themselves as well as when they're giving gifts to others. And again, this is overall, and we looked at this by occasion, and everything we have is by different generations. We looked at purchase behavior in different channels. How do people behave when they shop at florists versus supermarkets versus when they're shopping online, and what's important to them when they're shopping in these different channels. We look at some of the different gift-giving occasions and the emotional component of both giving and receiving flowers. We look at the importance of buying local in the overall purchase decision. This is something that we've seen growing in importance from the consumer perspective, and something that retailers have really been paying attention to over the past few years. So we wanted to really understand how important is local when people are buying flowers. As I mentioned, we looked at and examined the similarities and differences between generational segments, and we are looking at trends versus 2009 research as well as against the 2016 research. And finally, what I'll spend the second half of this hour on is really the marketing implications based on these results. A little bit about the research. We did conduct this study online back in 2009 and again last year in 2016 with a very robust sample size of 1,500 consumers were interviewed, 500 people from each of the 3 generations. 22 to 70 is the entire range, and we identified them by birth year. We had a nationally representative sample where it was equally distributed by gender, correct age distribution. We did make sure that everyone in the survey had bought flowers either in the past 12 years or people who would consider buying flowers in the future. So these are people who are at least somewhat engaged in the flower category and can speak to it. We also made sure there were no florists taking the survey. We have a competitive screener, and as I mentioned, it's nationally representative. So what I first want to do is just go through some of the key research insights that were learned here. I'm going to go through this first slide pretty quickly because we go into each of these more in depth, but just to give you a kind of overview of the first couple slides that we're going to be going through. The first finding, very positive from the florist perspective, is that flowers are really widely valued across all generations. And we saw that it wasn't so rational in nature, but it was really driven by a strong sensory as well as an emotional connection that consumers have with flowers, both in buying them, receiving them, and just the entire kind of flower experience. The second key finding we found is that of the two different situations for flowers, of either gifting or buying flowers for yourself, gifting continues to be the most common reason why consumers are buying flowers. And a positive finding we saw here is that local florists are the most widely shopped channel when it comes to gift purchases. And back in 2009, we saw supermarkets were kind of on par with florists when it came to gift-giving occasions. And we found that's no longer the case over the past year, where supermarkets have actually declined a little bit in terms of flower purchases compared to local florists. Although gifting is most popular, we're still seeing a lot of people that buy flowers just for themselves. In this situation, it's more of an equal share between local florists and supermarkets in terms of where consumers decide they want to go to buy flowers. And something that we saw pretty large movement compared to 2009 is that we're seeing a rise in farmers markets as a destination or channel, if you will, where consumers are now buying flowers when it comes to themselves. Something else that we're seeing is that there's a positive purchase trend in flower purchases. Now, this trend we're talking about is a 7-year difference. The first wave of this study was done in 2009 versus 2016 now. So we are seeing an increase, but it is a very long-term increase. A part of this is back in 2009, cost was a little bit more of a purchase barrier for buying flowers than it is now. And also we're seeing, as a kind of a side benefit of this trend, is we're seeing an increase in purchase behavior towards houseplants. So kind of another product in the mix for florists. Something that we saw and what we examined here in terms of buying at local florists is there are two what we call hidden opportunities for florists. And that's one is pushing the idea of being a local business, as well as your ability as a florist to provide expert recommendations. These are things we found in the research that consumers didn't explicitly state to them that was important to them when they decide where to shop for flowers. Those, through some analysis, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail, we found that it actually is driving purchase consideration when they decide to go to florists. And finally, we saw a lot of generational differences in the 2009 research where millennials, Gen X even to an extent, were as quite engaged in the category as baby boomers. But we found in this past year's research is that really narrowed, and we saw that millennials now, more than over the past several years, have more appreciation for flowers, more connection with flowers, and we are still seeing some differences in how they buy flowers, what's important to them, but a lot of the differences we saw over time have narrowed a bit, which helps as a florist in that you can have a little bit more of a unified marketing strategy. So I'm going to go through these one by one over the next few slides, and I will touch on marketing implications as we go through this, but and then at the end we'll go a little bit more in depth. So first is value and connection. So flowers are widely valued across all generations. You can see here 73%, about 3/4 of all consumers, have a high appreciation of flowers, which is very consistent by generation, ranging from 72% of baby boomers to 76% of Gen Y. This basically says that flowers are not a hard sell. There is this emotional connection with them. And with this, when you have a high appreciation of flowers and people are willing to buy them, the key is really remaining top of mind, both in your business, but also keeping flowers top of mind, as there is more noise out there and you're really competing for consumer mind share. You just have to make sure that people are always remembering flowers, and since they are predisposed to them, it will lead to more purchases. And what we found is that over a range of variables that we evaluated with flowers, it's just really driven by a strong sensory and emotional connection. We see that from a sensory perspective, its color, the sight and smell of flowers can really improve someone's mood. Fragrance, people indicated, is important to them. And then from the emotional side, people say that they feel special when they receive flowers as a gift. It's an emotional gift, and people believe it has a special meaning unlike any other gift. These are all increases in what we saw back versus 2009. So really, you know, when marketing flowers, these are really what you want to focus on. You don't want to be purely rational in terms of how you talk about flowers, and you, I guess, quote unquote, want to make consumers feel. And that is really a trend in advertising right now overall, and in terms of research uncovering what really drives successful advertising, and it's really focusing on the emotional. The next insight is about gifting and gifting purchase occasions. We found that is the most common reason people are purchasing flowers. 1/2 of all consumers we talked to had bought flowers for either some type of holiday or occasion for someone else in the past year. And this is actually a pretty consistent finding by generation, going from 48 to 51% of the 3 generations, and it was 53% back in 2009, so real no difference from a statistical perspective. We are seeing the second most common reason for buying flowers as a gift is quote unquote just because. So just no specific reason, they're just buying, which shows that flowers, for a gift perspective, doesn't have to be just occasion driven. It can be an everyday purchase that can be hopefully built into a greater everyday frequency if you do keep it top of mind and really push it as a gifting option. There's real power in gift giving, and this was a really interesting finding that we found in this study, is that 9 in 10 people remember the last time they gave flowers for a gift, but only 56% remember the last time they were received. Even though females were twice as likely as men to remember the last time they received, even females are more likely to say, I remember the last time I gave flowers. So really pushing that feeling of the gift giver feeling special, it can just further drive people to want to buy flowers for someone else. And there are, again, really strong emotional components to this. Flower gift givers are seen as being caring, personal, as well as sentimental. So again, these really strong emotional connections. In terms of where people are buying flowers in the gift-giving situation, local florists are the most common destination. 4/5 of consumers are buying gift purchases at local florists. So virtually all are going to local florists when it comes to buying a gift. 2/3 shop in person. There are some that shop primarily online or other channels such as phone. And during this time, we saw a significant decrease for supermarkets. So local florists have remained strong since 2009. There's been a decrease in the percentage of consumers that shop at supermarkets. We have seen an increase in online as a channel, and that can be either a national floral service, sorry about that, a national florist service, or your own own store website. This is important because when you think about selling, you don't want to think of just selling in your shop, selling just online, but think more of it as an omni-channel experience where you have different touch points where consumers can interact with your business. And that's going to be a theme that I kind of touch on over the rest of this hour, is you really want to be able to connect the all the different physical and digital aspects of your business, because that is really growing importance really in all of retail right now. Moving past gift giving and then going into self-purchasing, when people buy for themselves, there are a high percentage of consumers that are buying flowers for themselves right now. There's about half of consumers that are buying for gifts. About 2 in 5 are purchasing for home decoration. Excuse me. I apologize, everyone. I'm fighting a cold right now. These have increased as reasons, specifically among Gen Y. There are a multitude of reasons why people are buying for themselves. everyday decor, personal pick-me-up, holiday decor. So there's really a variety of reasons where you can push people to want to purchase flowers for themselves. And where are people going in these situations? Well, it's a little more varied. 3 and 4 are buying at local florists, not much lower than for everyday gifts, where it was 82%, but 72% are buying at supermarkets. So there's a much more balance in when gift purchasing from self between buying at the florist or going to supermarkets. We also see nursery and garden centers, 42% shop there. And we are seeing now that farmers markets are the 4th most popular channel. That was not the case back in 2009, and it's really increased among younger adults, your millennials, where now a full 1/3 are shopping at farmers markets. So this is a possible opportunity for florists. If you can get in, you are local. If you can sell at farmers markets as well, it gives you another touch point with consumers. And again, with just kind of going through all of these different scenarios where people can be buying for themselves, again, cannot reiterate enough, you just want to keep flowers top of mind for consumers so they can continue to buy in all these different situations. I want to talk a little bit about purchase trends back versus 2009. There is a positive purchase trend in flower purchases. We're seeing about 1/5, 18% of consumers say they buy more flowers now, more frequency compared to previous years, versus 9% back in 2009. So twice as many people say they're buying more frequently than in the past. There is a higher percentage that say they're purchasing less, 29%, which is obviously not what you want to see, but this was 54% in 2009. So a real moving in a real positive direction here. We see purchasing as gifts has been pretty consistent in terms of buying more often, 32% back in 2009, 32% now, but less frequently has decreased by a lot. It was 43% that were buying flowers less frequently as a gift back in 2009. That is now 18%. So again, flowers are moving in a real positive direction. A part of the reason here is that being too expensive is less of a barrier. 46% of people back in 2009 said flowers were too expensive for them. It's 34% now in 2016. From a statistical perspective, that is significant, meaning that is a real change. It's also a little more top of mind. 34% back in 2009 said they don't always think about buying flowers. It's down to 28% now. First and foremost, and that will likely always remain about barriers, people thinking that flowers don't last very long. That has remained the #1 barrier over time. Something I do want to point out, and I will touch on it again, is that the first wave of this study, the first time we did it was 2009, was immediately following the housing and market crash of 2008. So the U.S. economy was at a low point versus in 2016 where it was after months of continual growth. So the mindset of consumers was likely in a very different place, and that is driving some of this. One other area we're seeing benefiting from this is houseplants. 46% of consumers, nearly 1/2, say that they plan to purchase houseplants in the next 6 months. This is compared to 37% back in 2009. This is another product opportunity for florists, particularly since right now nursery centers and garden centers, I should say, are the most frequent destination for buying houseplants. Florists are not #1. This is another area to promote your business, especially since this is an increasing in consideration and more sales, therefore, could happen in the near and long term. So something else to think about your business. I'm going to talk, this can be somewhat of an intimidating chart here. We did something called drivers analysis, where we asked people what's important to them when they're buying from a florist. But then we did something called regression analysis, which uncovers the actual drivers, what's driving behavior to choose one florist over another, to choose florists over another channel. And we found that, and we have these red attributes, these are what we call critically important. People say it's important to them, but it's also, we uncovered is actually primary drivers, and that's getting what you expect or order. So you just have to follow through on what people want and order. But two, having a wide selection. So that's really important to consumers. You have to make sure that you carry both a wide selection of products as well as arrangement types. What I want to focus on a little more is on the lower right-hand side, these are what we call hidden opportunities. These are what people say is not very important to them, but it's actually what's driving the purchase decision in terms of going to one florist over another or choosing a florist over another channel. And there's two here that I think are really important, and that one is being a locally owned business. That's something that a florist can certainly promote versus, say, a supermarket or some type of website that may not be locally run, and that's important to people. So promoting that you are a locally owned business is something that can be leveraged, as well as this other one, provides expert recommendations. You are the experts. It's something that can be leveraged, again, versus, say, a supermarket where they may not have as much expertise as your local florist. So these are things that your consumers may not say are important to you, but they are driving it. There's two others that are important here as well. 24/7 accessibility, and that means always being able to browse, order, be in contact with a local florist. And along that same route is providing delivery options. So these are really, again, omni-channel implications. People want to be able to always shop at any time of the day, and they want to be able to pick up the flowers or receive their flowers in the manner that's easiest for them, whether it's online, in store, or having delivery. So that is very important, and again, to providing this kind of multiple touch points for consumers. Something you can look at later, I'm not going to spend too much time, but these ones in blue are attributes that we call cost of entry. They're not differentiators, but you have to be able to deliver on them to be in the consideration set. So you have to provide good value for the money, affordability, fast, good presentation, interesting designs, quality, and freshness. So these are important attributes, but they're not going to set you apart versus a competitor. Now I want to go into some generational differences. That is the topic of today's webinar. We saw more generational differences back in 2009, but there are some that really still hold true, and they tend to most be around channel usage in terms of how people want to shop for flowers, as well as the emotional connection that they have with flowers. Gen X, and this is kind of your middle generation, the age definition differs depending on who you talk to, but it's roughly ages 36 to 49. These are significantly more likely in other generations to consider florists. These are the ones most likely, in terms percentage-wise, to shop at a florist. They also tend to be the busiest. They want delivery options. They are more likely to have kids and be a little bit more on the go and have busy careers, and therefore, convenience is really important to them in that aspect. Something interesting is in person, we found, is still the most important method to buy flowers across all generations. But Gen Y, your millennials, are significantly more likely than others to prefer buying flowers online. 34% of them would like to buy flowers online versus about 1/4 of your other generations. And they're more likely than other generations to consider the internet as a channel in the future. And it's nearly half there, 44%. Versus 38% of Gen X, 32% of boomers. So that's something that's only going to increase over time in terms of a channel. So again, these two generations are making a very strong argument for having a really solid digital presence for your business, both in terms of browsing as well as purchasing. In this Gen Y, it extends to them being most likely to buy flowers using a local florist website. So not just in person, but also at the website. Baby boomers, they're far more likely to believe they have an emotional connection with flowers when it comes to gift giving. So in terms of how you talk to them, you can even dial up the emotion more. They're more likely than other generations to believe that gift giving or flowers is caring, personal, sentimental, tasteful. They're more likely to believe those who give flowers are thoughtful, sincere, and they're really taking the time to do something special. So the emotional component, while strong across all generations, is particularly strong among baby boomers. And if you are doing some type of generational marketing and segmenting by generation, is something really to think about in terms of dialing up among the baby boomers. So we have some kind of one-slide snapshots here. I won't go through everything here. Again, you will have access to this. Some important things I want to call out, and this is your millennials, 22 to 39. They value accessibility. Again, they use multiple channels. And really important, 32% here want to learn from social media. Friends and family is number one across all generations. Word of mouth is always strong. So as a business, with anything you can do to generate word of mouth is going to be really valuable. And I will get into that a little bit as well. Everyone finds TV important. Not everyone has the budget for TV, unfortunately, so there are other things you can do. But social media, 32% is a big one. This is the generation most likely to buy flowers on impulse, 50%. So again, keeping flowers top of mind can help generate those impulse purchases. Something else, they buy flowers to make myself feel better. There's a real emotional component there. It also gets to those just because purchase occasions. So something else to think about, and this is Gen Y more than other generations do this. In terms of occasions, dating, of course, versus other generations are less likely to be married. If you do have a business that caters more than average to millennials, that's something to think about in flowers and in those kind of dating occasions. And really focusing on the quick options. Again, convenience stores is one of the most popular channels for self-purchases, and this is higher than other generations. So they are making quick purchases, anything you can do to make it convenient again, and that gets to that 24/7 accessibility. 55% say it's important for them. So I think, really the takeaway here is you need to be really convenient for Gen Y. For Gen X, for this we had it as 40 to 51. It's a little different than I said before. It was the earlier age range in our 2009 research. But they're most likely to require convenience. So social media here, I'm going to just jump down to compare contrast. It was 32% for Gen Y. Social media is still really important here in terms of a channel for learning about flowers. Friends and family, again, number one. Color, so imagery, color of flowers adds impact to a gift. 74% agree with that. That's higher than other generations. That's the sensory component we were talking about. You can really focus on in communications or heighten it in terms of visuals. Something else, there's no real barriers that stick out more than any other generation, so that's always a positive as well. And they are the generation most likely to use a florist. Thinking about occasions, you have anniversaries, but just because is really big among this generation more than others. Other thing I want to note is I did mention that they are among the busiest and most hectic lives of the generations, and because of that, 69% say it's important that a florist provides delivery options. That's higher than other generations, something else you really want to focus on. And finally, baby boomers. This is where we really draw from a communication standpoint, a marketing standpoint. There's some contrast here. Social media was 32 and 29% among your other generations. It's 14% here. Baby boomers don't really rely on social media as much to get their floral information. Something that is a little more important is email. So they are still digitally finding their information through some type of online, but it's email. So if you have a business that's in a place where there are more baby boomers, then you may want to consider a newsletter or something, weekly updates with sales or whatever it is that you do. Baby boomers are more likely to want to learn from that way. Again, friends and family is more important. Something else, Discussions with florists and experts, it's highest among this generation. They want to talk to florists. They want to learn from florists. So again, you may have more actual interaction in person with baby boomers. They are more likely to shop at supermarkets than other generations, so that is something to keep in mind, and a place where you're going to try to steal business from. The gift occasions are a little different. They're more likely funerals, more tied to age, but birthdays as well, they more see as an occasion to buy flowers for others. And again, we talked about emotion with baby boomers. They're more likely to believe buying flowers is caring, tasteful, traditional, and that their generation is the one that has the greatest appreciation for flowers. At this point, I want to get into some implications. What does this research all mean? Just first, to make another point, I had touched on it, is that we saw a lot of improvement. Sorry, I'm going to head back here. We saw a lot of improvement versus 2009. We really believe this matches the overall consumer sentiment we saw, where we basically did this at the low point of consumer sentiment in 2009. 2016 is pretty much the highest point over the past 10 years, and we kind of saw that in some of the ratings. And we had increases in appreciation, attitudes, knowledge, flower purchases, purchase frequency, purchase interest. And a lot of these were more apparent among the younger generations who were kind of just starting out back in 2008 and 2009, and the economic impact hit them a little bit stronger. So getting into marketing implications, first and foremost, something we really saw, friends and family and social media are two of the primary ways where consumers want to receive information and trends about flowers. So this really allows the florist to create shareable experiences, which can generate that word of mouth between friends and family, on social media pages being a core channel to do that. And what you really want to do is create information that generates shares, retweets, likes, mentions, and really presenting a content opportunity for florists. So this really can create visibility for your business. And for Gen Y and Gen X, where social media is much more important, you can have YouTube videos about educational topics for flowers. You can write a blog, which allows you to be the expert and educate, and again, tying in the sensory and emotional elements. Having a Facebook page, posting on Twitter, Instagram and Snapchat are great for visuals in terms of showing pictures of flowers and really using that sensory and emotional imagery that can really connect and keep it top of mind, but also in an attractive way that can have people want to like it and possibly even share it with others. And Pinterest obviously is another channel where people really share and digest this kind of information. Among all generations, email is very much a viable channel. We saw particularly among baby boomers where they prefer that over social media. But with that said, millennials and Gen X are still really consuming that type of information. Traditional advertising, if you have the budget, TV, print publications is still important to people in terms of learning about flowers. And then if any of you have commercial business, LinkedIn is a very valuable channel. If you do find that some of your clients are on the site, and you can really engage them there as well. Just some tips for all of this. It's important that you don't try to always sell in social media, particularly your millennials, where a recent study showed that a very high percentage say they really don't trust advertising. So you really want to find the right mix of providing real useful content and education with actually pushing your business and promoting your business as well. Really important, and this is growing importance as well, think mobile first when targeting Gen Y. If you do have digital website and other digital channels, kind of reiterating, when Mark Zuckerberg said to his Facebook employees, if you want to introduce something new on Facebook, it has to work on mobile, because that's how people are mostly consuming digital content. So you have to make sure that it works there as well. Really important to customize your content by social media channel. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Facebook should be more conversational in nature. Twitter obviously is going to have to be concise. You have 140 characters. If you put some kind of picture up, you get even less. I think it's 120. Instagram is purely visual. So you really want to have a different tone on each of these different channels. You also want to study the times of day and the days of the week where you want to post this information. There are a lot of studies out there that show you that, for this channel, Fridays and Sundays are the best times. And, it's at noon versus this channel versus 8 p.m. at night is when you have the most engagement. So, you really want to study. There are patterns that show when the most people are on and engaging it. At the same time, if you find it's a channel that's really crowded in your space, you can go against the grain and go to some of those times where there maybe is not as much traffic, but you're competing and there's less competition and less noise out there. Also, you want to study the frequency. Posting once a day on Facebook is fine, perfectly fine. Once a day on Twitter, it may get lost, large feed. So Twitter, you can post on an hourly basis and you probably be okay, and people may unfriend you if you do that on Facebook or on Instagram. Also, do things that encourage sharing. Like this please like this post if you believe this, or if you agree with what we're saying, share this. Tag friends and family who may be interested. Every time you do that, it shows up in someone else's feed. It really generates that word of mouth, which is most important to people. And this all in the end leads to you being top of mind, which is most important in a crowded space. Next, really thinking about the occasions and understanding the occasions that are more common to specific generations. For example, Gen Y, going on dates. Housewarming is something that is a little more common of a floral gift-giving occasion there. Gen X, well, just because is across all three generations, Gen X is more likely to buy just for no particular reason, and that's something that can be taken advantage of. Obviously, sympathy for baby boomers. And then across all generations, you do have, these kind of universal reasons. But really, in your content creation, you can really create these everyday occasions, these just because occasions that can help increase purchase frequency. And really, from everything we found, that there's a real educational opportunity here in generational marketing, content creation, and then even this extends to your in-store, your in-shop experience. One stat we found in the research is less than half of consumers indicate they know which flowers are appropriate for specific situations. People do not widely consider themselves as experts. And we also found that providing expert recommendations is a hidden opportunity for florists. So you can really take advantage of all of this and be that expert, again, in terms of your marketing to different generations and actually educating them about different scenarios and different types of flowers and all the different situations that there are. And it's particularly true among your baby boomers, we saw, who really rely on personal discussions with florists as experts. This also can be valuable in the in-store and the online retail spaces. Something we see in other channels, for example, in wine or specialty stores, is kind of those florist recommendations where you can have something that you put together or something that you recommend particularly that allows them to feel a little more comfortable and confident in their purchases. We did see that compared to 2009, flowers are less likely to be seen as a luxury item. But with that said, it's still really important that you deliver on value. We did see the decreased barrier of cost being a reason why people wouldn't buy flowers, but 2 cost of entry attributes, things that you have to deliver on in order to be in the conversation, is being, a good value for the money, as well as being affordable. These 2 attributes are important to all 3 generations. So you just have to be able to really demonstrate that you're giving people value for the money. And also, obviously, this isn't a catch-all, be-all for all florists and all businesses, as you may occupy different spaces in terms of who your core or target customer is, but you still want to show that affordability as well as value. And I can't reiterate enough, it's all about the emotional and the sensory experiences. These sensory elements such as color, sight, and smell, along with your emotions like feeling special, having special meaning, they're really strongly connected with the process of actually buying flowers, giving flowers, as well as receiving them. So in store, you can really reinforce this by using a lot of color in your displays, a lot of color on your website through your social media images that you post, and even your print materials. This can be effective. It can increase your chances of customer conversion. Further, really using emotion in communications. More and more advertising research is showing that emotion works in advertising. I think a perfect example is Super Bowl advertising, which the advertising tends to be a little different than the types of ads you see the rest of the year, and they often rely a little bit more on that emotion, which creates that connection with consumers. And that emotion is a natural fit in this category, where people say it is one of the things that they love about flowers, and that is strongly connected with the experience. Lastly, a majority of millennials as well as Gen X say that when they buy flowers as a gift, it makes them look good. You can subtly reinforce this, this positive emotion they feel in marketing efforts, and that could in turn increase purchase motivation. Again, these hidden opportunities that we said, local and convenience, they're really opportunities that can be leveraged by florists. Being a locally owned business, it's a hidden opportunity, and really being involved in your community is another way where you can express this association with being local. One way that we saw it in this study is connection with farmers markets. It's growing channel in terms of buying for the self. 1/3 of Gen Y are buying through this. And if you have the opportunity to participate in farmers markets, not only are you adding a new channel where you can increase sales, but it's also just connecting people to your business as being part of the local community. Something else extremely important is convenience, particularly in urban areas where we're seeing delivery speed rapidly increasing in terms of 1-hour delivery from Amazon and just more delivery options, pickup options. So it's just something you really need to do. And therefore, having that omni-channel experience, which includes having 24/7 accessibility, delivery, pickup options, it's really important, particularly among Gen X. Further, you're seeing, omni-channel coming really around in the supermarkets where they're having more delivery options. You're seeing more supermarkets that have what is called click and pickup, where people can order online and pick up their groceries at the door. There are apps where people can buy in advance. So being that supermarkets are one of your main channel competitors, it's something that you may want to think about, is having these options available. There are even startups now that are similar to Uber, but they focus on actually working with small businesses and providing delivery options if it's something you cannot do yourself. And at the end of the day, what you're really trying to do is give consumers every opportunity to connect with you and shop 24 hours a day. And lastly, houseplants. They really represent another revenue stream for florists. Consideration of houseplants is on the rise among Gen X as well as your millennials, and it's complementing consumer usage of just flowers for everyday decor in their home. But right now, houseplants are not commonly thought of as being purchased at florists. They more likely go to places like either supermarkets or even more often nurseries and garden centers. This can be another product for florists, another way to increase sales as consideration of houseplants increases. You can also insert it. There's a real, obviously home design trend, and that gives you another social media opportunity, something to really push on these visual sites like Pinterest and playing into these themes. And it also gives you another content topic if you are going to blog or post on social media and other communications, and hopefully give consumers another reason to shop at your business. So that is the last slide. I want to thank everyone who's here and listening in today. I'm going to turn it over to Janet, who I know is monitoring, and if some questions come in, be happy to answer them for you.
Marc, just want to thank you for sharing a lot of great information with us today. As Marc mentioned, we are open for questions, so if you have a question, simply type it in that question box on the upper right side of your screen. And we do have one. Anne was questioning, she said one of your bullet points indicated that florists are now used more than supermarkets, but she said they've seen data that says grocery sales are increasing. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so in our study, what we asked is the percentage of people who shop at different channels. So we know that when buying for gifts, that local florists are used more often than supermarkets. What we did not measure in this study was purchase frequency. People are presumably in supermarkets every day. I know just from doing a lot of supermarket research for a lot of grocery retailers that a lot of people are shopping multiple times per week. So I don't think that the two stats contradict each other. The actual purchase from a dollar volume perspective may be higher in supermarkets just because there's more opportunity. However, more consumers are actually shopping at florists when they are buying flowers for gifts.
Great. We also have another question from Zach. He said you mentioned the importance of omni-channel. Are you seeing that in other industries, he's wondering?
Yeah, so we work with a number of Fortune 500 retailers, some of the largest ones out there, as well as a lot of more smaller regional chains, and we're seeing that it is a near universal challenge right now, particularly with Amazon and even Walmart now becoming more powerful in acquiring some of these online-only retailers. I just on my Twitter, I just put out a stat that I saw a couple days ago that something like 10% of the largest retailers are making money at digital. So it's a real problem right now. Most companies and retailers, you have to be in digital, but a lot of them haven't figured it out yet. But at that same time, to compete, you have to be there. And I mean, there's a whole industry of people right now trying to figure out the best way to make a seamless omni-channel experience, and it is something that certainly is a work in progress for a lot of companies, but it is kind of across the board, across all categories, something that needs to be addressed.
All right. I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, type it in that question box in the upper right side of your screen. We have one from Mike who is wanting to know how the survey, the respondents were selected for the survey to get the information that you have in this research study.
Yeah, so we use online research panels. There are a number of what are called panels that there are literally millions of Americans who've signed up for it to receive surveys. So we choose a random selection across these millions of people, send them email invitations, ask them to participate in a survey, and from there they click on a link and they go to our website where the survey was completed. It's a very common form of polling these days.
All right, thank you so much. And it looks like we are out of questions now, so we just want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. If you missed a portion of the webinar or you want to review it again, a replay will be available at FTD University online later this week. The webinar materials, the slides here that Marc has been using are available at ftdi.com, simply click on FTD University on the Toolkit Resources drop-down and then click through to that webinar series page. You'll be able to access all of this information. As always, we will be sending you a very brief survey to gather your feedback on today's webinar. So we just ask you to take a minute to complete the survey and help us improve future webinars and other education programs for you. Our next FTD webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, March 28th. Tim Huckabee, President of Floral Strategies, will show you how to provide dynamic, engaging customer service that leaves customers happy and loyal. Registration is already available at ftdi.com, so please be sure to register as soon as possible and reserve your spot. Again, just want to thank you, Marc, for sharing a lot of great information on the key similarities and differences by the generations and how to market to each one. This concludes FTD's webinar, Developing a Multi-Generational Marketing Approach. Thank you, everyone.